Let me be clear. Gentlemen of the council, you are not listening to an expert. You are listening to a waitress whose only real asset in this negotiation is her personal, and I suspect very intimate, relationship with my son. The accusation, delivered with the cold, ruthless precision of a scalpel, hung in the air of the city hearing room. Nathaniel Vance did not raise his voice, but the venom in his words was loud enough to silence the room, turning a professional hearing into a public execution. On the podium, Leah Rowe froze as if struck, the color draining from her face, while every eye in the room turned to Zachary Vance, the millionaire heir suddenly caught between his father's brutal legacy and the quiet dignity of the woman he was beginning to love. The atmosphere in the Chicago City Planning Commission hearing room was as solemn and heavy as the marble columns that supported the soaring ceiling. Cold artificial light poured down from above, reflecting off the polished oak tables and stern faces of the commissioners. This was an arena of power, where million-dollar blueprints and the fate of neighborhoods were decided. Standing at the podium, Zachary Vance felt everyone's eyes on him. He, 39, vice president of Vance Development and heir to a real estate empire, was presenting the jewel in his family's crown, Vance Tower, a 90-story glass and steel skyscraper that was supposed to redefine Chicago's skyline. His voice was steady and confident, the technical jargon flowing smoothly, but beneath his perfectly tailored Zegna suit, his heart was beating irregularly, because across the room, sitting among the residents and community activists, was Leah Rowe. Her face was worried, but her warm brown eyes held an unwavering determination. She wore a simple coat, her dark hair tied back in a bun, looking out of place among the power suits. But her presence was stronger than anyone else in the room. She was the reason for the irregular beating in his chest. After Zachary finished, it was Leah's turn to speak. She took the podium. No flashy drawings, just a pad of notes and a burning passion in her voice. She didn't talk about profits or square footage. She talked about history, about community, about the soul of the Orpheum Theater, a Beaux-Arts architectural gem that now sits on a development site, awaiting its death sentence from the bulldozer. She talked about the hand-carved details, the dust of time that shrouds a glorious past, and what it means to a neighborhood that's losing its identity. Her speech was good, too good. Zachary could see the commissioners nodding, their initial skepticism melting away at Leah's sincerity. Suddenly, another voice rang out, cold and authoritative. "Gentlemen of the committee, please allow me to speak." Nathaniel Vance, Zachary's father, the chairman of Vance Development, stood. He was 68 years old and the embodiment of old money power, perfectly groomed silver hair, an unwrinkled bespoke suit, and cold gray eyes that could freeze you. He didn't take the podium. He didn't need to. The room was his stage. Nathaniel didn't argue about architecture or cost. He went straight for a personal attack, targeting the opposition's only weakness. "Your Honor," Nathaniel's voice rang out, patronizing and full of contempt. "We are wasting valuable city time listening to a waitress." He paused, letting the words sink into the air so that everyone could picture a girl in an apron and receiving tips, a person with no expertise, no relevant qualifications, a person whose only interest in this project, I fear, he glanced at Zachary, a look as sharp as a knife, is her personal relationship with my son. This is not about historic preservation. This is a blatant and calculated attempt to extort money from the Vance family. The room went silent. The vicious accusation hung in the air. Leah stood frozen on the podium, her face pale with shock and humiliation. All eyes were now on Zachary. They were waiting. What would he do? Would he choose his powerful father and his billion-dollar legacy? Or would he side with the maid whose name he secretly called out to during his sleepless nights? 4 months ago. That night, Zachary's black Mercedes S-Class sped aimlessly through the wet streets of Chicago. He had just had a 3-hour discussion with his father, a discussion that was essentially a lecture on responsibility, legacy, and his own frailty. His brother, Robert, the perfect heir, would never let a project stall like this. Robert would never let emotions get in the way of business. Robert had died 10 years earlier in a car accident, but his shadow still loomed over every aspect of Zachary's life. tired and discouraged. He pulled into a small corner diner, an oasis of warm light in the cold night. The corner booth. The name was simple. All he wanted was a quiet place, a cup of coffee, and 5 minutes away from a Vance. The diner was nearly empty. He sat at a small bar, and a woman with dark brown hair pulled back in a ponytail approached. She wasn't wearing any fancy uniform, just a simple black t-shirt and an apron tied around her waist. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice tired but still friendly. "Yes, please." "Black," he replied. She poured him a cup. He took a sip and grimaced. It tasted pretty bad. The girl saw this and laughed. A soft laugh. "I know, but at this hour, it keeps us awake. Doesn't it?" "Yes." He smiled back. For the first time that day, he felt like he could breathe. They talked. Not the fake small talk he was so used to. They talked about the long nights, about why coffee at night cafes always tasted like that, about the books they were reading. Her name was Leah. She was smart, sharp, and had expressive eyes. She treated him like any other customer, without any curiosity or pretension. It was obvious she had no idea who he was. And that was a relief. As he left, he tucked a $500 bill under his coffee cup. It wasn't a show-off. It was an awkward way to say thank you for giving him a moment of peace. He came back. Many times. Always sitting in Leah's section, pretending it was a coincidence. He learned she studied architecture during the day at the Art Institute of Chicago, specializing in historic preservation. He learned she worked nights to pay her tuition and take care of her grandmother. He admired her resilience. In one conversation, to start a conversation, he casually mentioned his company's biggest project. "We're planning a new tower in the south of the Loop," he said. "Vance Tower." Instantly, the smile on Leah's lips vanished. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by a cold wariness. "Vance Tower," she repeated, her voice different. "The project will destroy the Orpheum Theater." Zachary was stunned. You know about it." "Know about it? I was one of the leaders of the Save the Orpheum campaign," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "So you're a Vance." In an instant, their worlds collided. He was the destroyer. She was the protector. He should have been angry, should have felt betrayed. Instead, he was impressed. He was impressed by her passion, by her courage in standing up to a giant corporation. The next day, he made a strange proposal. He met her after school. "I want to hire you," he said bluntly. Leah looked at him as if he were crazy. "Have you forgotten who I am? I am your enemy?" "No." Zachary shook his head. "You know the best about the challenges we face. I want you to work with my team of architects. As a consultant, so we can better understand the opposing side's perspective and maybe come up with a solution." He paused, then added, "I'll pay you $5,000 a month." Leah narrowed her eyes suspiciously. She knew this was some kind of trap, but she also knew this might be her only chance to have a say, to influence the project from the inside, instead of just yelling from the outside. And $5,000 a month would be a huge change for her and her grandmother. "Okay, Vance," she said, emphasizing his last name. "I will, but I will not sell out my ideals. If I feel like you are taking advantage of me, I will quit immediately." "Deal," Zachary said. A strange sense of excitement spreading through him. The early meetings were a battleground. Leah, in an old sweater and jeans, sat across from a team of architects dressed in Vance development uniforms. They spread out flashy 3D renderings of a gleaming glass tower. She spread out black and white photos of the faded Orpheum Theater. "We're talking about space efficiency and return on investment," said a senior architect, his voice condescending. "And I'm talking about the soul of a city," Leah replied, unfazed. "Something that can't be priced in dollars." Zachary sat at the head of the table, watching. He saw his architects initially look down on her, but gradually they began to listen. Leah's knowledge of historical architecture was not theoretical. It was deep and practical. She pointed out building techniques and materials they had never heard of. Respect began to form, grudgingly. The real turning point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Zachary, on an impulse, agreed to visit the Orpheum Theater with Leah. Inside, the air was musty and cold. Light filtered through broken windows, illuminating the thick layers of dust that covered the worn red velvet seats. For Zachary, it was a dead space, a financial burden. But Leah didn't see it that way. "Look," she said, pointing to the vaulted ceiling. Underneath the grime, intricate frescoes of Greek muses were still there. And here, she led him to a wrought iron spiral staircase, each step a work of art. She told him stories about Louis Armstrong, about Frank Sinatra, who had performed on this stage. For the first time, Zachary didn't see a ruin. He saw forgotten beauty. He saw potential. He began to see it through her eyes. Standing in the majestic silence of the old theater, a deep connection grew between them, an understanding that transcended the arguments in the boardroom. Their relationship grew beyond work. In the evenings, after Leah finished her shift and Zachary finished a long day of dealing with his father, they began calling each other. The calls started out just about projects, but they soon turned into conversations about everything and nothing. He told her about the pressure of living in the shadow of his dead brother, about never being good enough in his father's eyes. He confessed that he had frequent nightmares about the night of the accident, a tragedy his family had kept quiet. She told him about the anxiety of carrying the hopes of a community on her shoulders, the fear of letting them down. She talked about her grandmother, how much she had sacrificed so she could pursue her dreams. The other's name became a balm in the darkness. "Zachary," she would whisper into the phone when she couldn't sleep. "Leah," he would say when he woke from a nightmare. They became each other's safe haven, two lonely people finding common ground in an unexpected place. Spurred on by Leah's passion and his own doubts, Zachary did something he had never done before he went against his father's wishes. He asked the archives to turn over all of the original technical records of the Orpheum project, documents that predated his involvement. And there he found it, wedged among hundreds of pages of meaningless paper. A 20-page structural survey report done by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, one of the world's most prestigious engineering firms. It was stamped confidential. He read it, then read it again. The conclusion was clear as day. The structural steel frame of the Orpheum Theater, a fine example of early 20th century engineering, remains in extremely sound condition. Restoration and integration into a modern structure is entirely technically feasible. Zachary's blood ran cold. His father knew. He had known all along that the theater could be saved. But he had deliberately buried the report. Demolition would save millions of dollars. Demolition would save 6 months. Time and money were everything to Nathaniel Vance. History and beauty were mere distractions. This discovery changes everything. This is no longer a design debate. This is a lie. But Nathaniel Vance was not a man to be trifled with. He sensed the change in his son, the hesitation, the underlying defiance, and he began to strike back. He invited Isabel Sterling to dinner with his family. Isabel, Zachary's ex-fiancée and the daughter of another wealthy family, was the perfect ally. She was elegant, calculating, and had not given up hope of uniting the Vance and Sterling families. "Zachary, are you letting a maid lead you around?" Isabel told him one evening, her voice sweet but venomous. "You have to remember who you are and where you stand. People like her are just trying to take advantage of you." The attack became more public. Nathaniel leaked to a tabloid reporter a story about an unruly affair between the Vance heir and the community activist. Headlines began to appear, hinting at an improper relationship, compromising the objectivity of the upcoming hearing. Cornered between the truth he had just discovered and the loyalty he had been taught all his life, Zachary was in turmoil. He felt like he was being torn in two. Part of him wanted to fight, to expose everything. But the other part, the part that had been molded by his father, was afraid. Afraid of confrontation, afraid of destroying the family legacy, afraid of no longer being a Vance. In a panic, he did the worst thing he could. He met Leah at a park, a neutral and emotionless place. "Leah," he began, not daring to meet her eyes. "It's getting too complicated. The press, my father, maybe we should stop. At least until this is over." Leah looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Stop. What are you talking about? Zachary, we were so close. You saw the truth." "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but it's not that simple. This is my family." The hurt in Leah's eyes slowly faded to cold disappointment. She had been wrong. She had believed he was different. But in the end, he was still a Vance. Blood was thicker than flesh. "I see," she said, her voice drained of warmth. "Good luck with your tower, Mr. Vance." She turned and walked away, leaving Zachary alone with his own cowardice. And now, standing in the hearing room, his father's venomous words still echoed. A blatant attempt to extort money? He looked at Leah, standing stunned on the stand, pale but straight. He saw the hurt he had caused her. Then he looked at his father, who was looking at him with a warning gaze, a silent command to be quiet and obey. In a moment of silence that seemed to last an eternity, everything became clear. His brother's shadow, his father's pressure, the expectations of a clan, it was all a cage. And Leah, with her courage and integrity, had unwittingly given him the key. He stepped onto the dais, standing beside Leah. He didn't look at her, but his proximity was a promise. He looked straight at his father. "My father was wrong," Zachary said, his voice ringing out, clear and steady, cutting through the silence. The room was in an uproar. Nathaniel Vance narrowed his eyes, a flash of anger. "Leah Rowe is not a money-grubbing asshole," Zachary continued, his voice growing stronger. "She is a talented architect, a passionate activist, and she was right. She was right about everything." He turned to look at the committee chairman. "There is an important fact that has been withheld from this hearing." He gestured to his assistant, who was waiting. Instantly, the first page of the Skidmore. Owings and Merrill report appeared on the large screen behind him, the words "extremely strong and entirely possible" magnified. Vance Development had evidence that not only could the Orpheum Theater be saved, but that it was a structural marvel, Zachary said. This report was deliberately withheld. He didn't need to say who had hidden it. The whole room knew. Nathaniel Vance stood frozen, his face ashen. His veneer of power and invulnerability had been stripped bare by his own son. "Therefore," Zachary concluded, "I am formally withdrawing the current plans for Vance Tower. Instead, we will submit a completely new design within 6 months. A design that will preserve and honor the Orpheum Theater as an integral part of the project. And I would like to announce that, if she accepts, we would like to engage Ms. Leah Rowe as the lead consulting architect for this new design." He turned to look at Leah. For the first time in days, he looked her straight in the eye, unblinking, unafraid. The shock in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a glimmer of hope and forgiveness. The meeting ended in chaos. The commissioners, sensing a public relations victory, quickly expressed their support for Zachary's bold new vision. Nathaniel Vance's authority was shaken to its core. He left the room in silence, looking for the first time in his life like a defeated old man. Zachary found Leah standing alone in the hallway outside, shaking, probably from adrenaline and pent-up emotions. "Leah," he began, his voice filled with regret. She looked up at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything, for pushing you away. I was scared, and I was a coward. I almost lost the most important thing in my life because of that fear." He took a deep breath. "You didn't just save a building today. You saved me." Tears began to roll down Leah's cheeks, but this time, they were tears of relief. She said nothing, just nodded slightly. And right there, in the lobby of Chicago City Hall, with reporters beginning to gather, Zachary leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was passionate, remorseful, and a commitment. It was a declaration of his choice, a choice not between family and love, but between who he had been and who he wanted to be. 1 year later, the Orpheum Theater's crystal chandeliers, meticulously restored, shine once again. Tonight is the opening gala, and the entire city of Chicago seems to be there. The old theater is now the heart of a new cultural and commercial complex, a perfect blend of old and new, called the Vance Rowe Center. On stage, Leah Rowe, now a rising name in the architectural world, finished her speech. She wore an emerald green gown, looking stunning and confident. "Buildings are more than bricks and mortar," she said, her voice echoing across the room. "They are memories. They are dreams. They are the containers for our souls." In the front row, Zachary Vance, who had officially taken over as CEO of Vance Development after his father's early retirement, was looking at her with an unconcealed look of pride and love. After the ceremony ended, when the audience had left and only the staff were cleaning up, Zachary found Leah standing alone on stage, under the only dim light that was still on. He stepped forward, his boots echoing in the vast space. He took her hand. "You were right," he said softly. "This place really has a soul." Then, to her surprise, he slowly knelt down on one knee. The oak stage they had fought to save together now became the setting for the most important moment of their lives. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket. "Leah Rowe, you taught me how to rebuild things, not just with steel and glass, but with truth and heart. You rebuilt me. Will you marry me?" Leah burst into tears, a bright smile appearing through her eyes. She couldn't form words, just nodded vigorously. Zachary stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and held her close. On the very stage that had once symbolized their conflict, they had found harmony. They had built something greater than a skyscraper, a shared future, built on honesty, courage, and a love that conquered all. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you love this story, don't forget to click like to support the channel. Share this story with family and friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories.